Cop demands protection money from black street vendor. Not know he's an undercover federal marshal. Cars honked impatiently as they inched through traffic. The chatter of pedestrians filled the air, and the occasional aroma of food from nearby vendors drifted along the sidewalks. Amid all this chaos, Jamal Harris wheeled his small food cart into his usual spot, a corner near the busy intersection that connected several neighborhoods. Jamal had been working this corner for almost 5 years. Day in and day out, he served breakfast and lunch to a steady stream of customers who had grown to know him not just for his cooking, but for his friendly demeanor and warm smile. Jamal had learned early in life that life did not hand out favors easily. He had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and trust was hard to come by, but he had always had a determination that set him apart. Even as a child, he had dreamed of owning a small business, something of his own where he could be independent and not rely on anyone else to make ends meet. After years of saving every spare dollar he could, he had finally managed to buy his first food cart. It was old and battered, but it was his. Every scrape and scratch on it told a story of hard work and perseverance. Running the food cart was not easy. The early mornings were brutal. Jamal would wake up before sunrise to prepare his ingredients, making sure everything was fresh and ready for the day. He chopped vegetables, cooked meat, and arranged sandwiches with care. By the time the city started to stir, Jamal was ready. He would open his cart with a smile, greeting his first customers like old friends, even if he had never met them before. His charm and genuine personality made people feel welcome, and his food, simple but delicious, kept them coming back. Despite his dedication and hard work, the life of a street vendor was not free from challenges. The city had strict rules for vending, and there were countless officers patrolling the streets, making sure everyone followed them. Jamal had learned to navigate these rules carefully, paying his fees, keeping his cart clean, and always staying polite, even when others tried to push him around. But there was one officer, Officer Davis, who seemed to take a personal interest in making Jamal's life more difficult. Davis was the kind of officer who seemed to enjoy the power he had over people. He often stopped by the food carts in his area, looking for opportunities to intimidate vendors. Some people called it protection money, others just called it harassment. For Jamal, it was a constant source of stress. Davis would show up unexpectedly, lean against the cart with a smirk, and demand money or favors in exchange for letting the vendor continue working. Most vendors paid quietly, afraid of what might happen if they refused. But Jamal had always believed that giving in to intimidation was not the way to live. He had seen too many people in his neighborhood lose their dignity, their sense of self, because they allowed fear to control them. The tension between Jamal and Officer Davis had been building for months. Each encounter left Jamal more determined to stand his ground, but he also knew he had to be careful. Davis had a reputation for being aggressive, and a confrontation with him could easily escalate into something dangerous. Jamal had thought long and hard about what to do. He could report the officer, but often complaints against police officers were ignored, or worse, led to retaliation. He knew he had to find another way to protect himself and his business. This is where Jamal's other life came into play. What no one in the neighborhood knew, not even some of his closest friends, was that Jamal was not just a food vendor. Beneath his casual clothes and friendly smile, he was a trained federal marshal, working undercover to investigate corruption within the police department. It had not been an easy path to get here. Years of training, long nights of studying laws and procedures, and countless assignments had led him to this point. His current assignment required him to blend into the community, appearing as an ordinary citizen, while observing and collecting evidence on officers who abused their power. For Jamal, the food cart was more than just a business. It was the perfect cover for his undercover work. Every day, as he served customers, he kept a watchful eye on his surroundings. He noticed patterns in the way certain officers moved, the way they treated vendors, and the subtle ways they exerted control over the streets. Every interaction was an opportunity to gather information, to document behavior that might otherwise go unnoticed. The challenge was to do all of this without revealing his true identity. One wrong move could blow his cover and put him in serious danger. On this particular morning, the air was crisp, and the city was slowly waking up. Jamal arranged his food neatly, placing sandwiches and drinks in a way that was both attractive and efficient. He checked his supplies, making sure he had everything he needed for the busy day ahead. As usual, he smiled and greeted his first customers, a group of construction workers who had become regulars. They laughed and joked with him, and he responded in kind, keeping the conversation light but friendly. Then, as if on cue, Officer Davis appeared. Jamal noticed him from the corner of his eye, leaning casually against a nearby lamppost. Davis's presence made some of the customers uneasy, and Jamal felt a familiar tightening in his chest. But he did not let it show. He continued serving his customers, keeping his movements smooth and deliberate. Davis walked up to the cart, his expression a mix of annoyance and expectation. "Morning, Harris," Davis said, his tone dripping with false friendliness. "You know how this works. Gotta keep things smooth, a little something for me and we won't have any problems." Jamal's heart rate quickened slightly, but he maintained his calm. He had rehearsed this moment many times in his mind, knowing that it might happen sooner or later. "Morning, Officer Davis," Jamal replied evenly. "I'm running a legitimate business here. All my permits are in order. I follow the rules." Davis scoffed and leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You know what I mean. Don't play dumb. You and the others know how this works." Jamal nodded slowly, pretending to consider the officer's words. "I understand," he said softly. "But I don't give out money like that. I'm not interested in getting involved in anything illegal." Davis's smirk faded, replaced by a look of irritation. He straightened up and looked around, noticing the other vendors and pedestrians. "You think you're special, Harris? You think this doesn't apply to you?" Jamal kept his expression neutral, hiding the surge of adrenaline that was coursing through him. He had to stay in control. One wrong word or gesture could escalate the situation. He had a plan, and he needed to stick to it. "Officer, I'm just trying to run my business," Jamal said. "I have responsibilities. I have a family to support. I don't want trouble." Davis stared at him for a moment as if trying to size him up. He clearly did not expect resistance, and the tension in his body showed it. Jamal noticed every detail, the way Davis's fingers twitched, the slight shift of his weight, the glint in his eyes. All of these small signals told Jamal how to respond next. As the morning continued, more customers arrived. Jamal served them quickly, keeping up the appearance of a busy and friendly vendor. Davis lingered, trying to assert his presence, but Jamal refused to engage in any confrontation. He focused on the food, the customers, and the surroundings. Every sound, every movement was part of the picture he needed to paint later for his report. This was the life Jamal had chosen. It was demanding, sometimes stressful, but it was also meaningful. He was not only providing for himself and his family, but he was also working to make the streets safer and fairer. He was fighting a quiet, hidden battle against corruption, one interaction at a time. And he knew that patience, observation, and careful planning were his greatest allies. By the time the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, Jamal had served hundreds of customers. Officer Davis had left for a short while, muttering under his breath about people who thought they were clever. Jamal took a deep breath and allowed himself a small smile. He had survived another encounter, kept his cool, and gathered valuable information. He knew that the bigger confrontation was still ahead, but he also knew he was ready. Running a food cart in the city was not just about selling sandwiches and drinks. For Jamal, it was about resilience, intelligence, and courage. Each day was a test of character, a chance to prove that standing up for what is right could be done without giving in to fear. And as he wiped down his cart and prepared for the next round of customers, Jamal felt a quiet satisfaction. He was exactly where he needed to be, ready for whatever the streets and Officer Davis might throw at him next. The morning had been tense, but Jamal Harris knew that the real test was yet to come. Officer Davis had left, but Jamal could sense that he would return. The officer had a reputation for being relentless. He did not let things go easily, especially when someone defied him. Jamal wiped down his cart and rearranged the food, keeping his movements casual as if nothing had happened. Yet beneath his calm exterior, his mind was already running through scenarios, imagining how the next encounter might unfold. Jamal had always been careful. He understood that Officer Davis thrived on fear and intimidation. The more a vendor reacted, the more power Davis seemed to feel. Jamal had learned to master his reactions. He had trained himself to stay calm, to observe, and to act only when necessary. In this way, he could turn an uncomfortable situation into an opportunity to gain information. This skill had served him well during his undercover work, allowing him to blend into communities, gather evidence, and expose corruption without ever being discovered. As the morning progressed, the streets became busier. Workers streamed past his cart on their way to construction sites and offices, and Jamal served them with his usual smile. His customers were unaware of the inner tension, laughing and joking as he handed them sandwiches and drinks. Jamal appreciated their trust. He had worked hard to build these relationships, showing that he was not just another street vendor, but someone who cared about the people in his neighborhood. Then, just as he had expected, Officer Davis returned. This time he approached with a noticeable sense of impatience. His steps were heavier, and his eyes scanned the cart with a look that combined annoyance and authority. Jamal noticed the small details, the way Davis clenched his jaw, the slight twitch of his hand, the faint scowl that creased his forehead. Every small gesture spoke volumes. Jamal remained calm, greeting him with a polite nod, pretending that everything was normal. "Back again, Harris," Davis said, his voice carrying a hint of irritation. "I thought we talked this morning." "We did," Jamal replied evenly, keeping his tone neutral. "I'm just trying to serve my customers and do my job, nothing more, nothing less." Davis leaned against the cart, crossing his arms. "You think ignoring me will make this go away? You think rules and permits matter to people like me?" His eyes scanned the busy street, ensuring that no one was paying too much attention. "You know how this works. A little money, a little respect, and everyone stays happy. You understand that, right?" Jamal nodded slowly, pretending to consider the officer's words. "I understand, officer, but I don't participate in that. I run my business honestly. That's all I can do." Davis's smirk returned, but it was forced this time. He clearly did not expect resistance. "You think you're clever, Harris? You think you can just say no and not face consequences?" Jamal maintained his composure. His heart was racing, but he refused to show fear. He had prepared for this moment, knowing that Davis could escalate if he sensed weakness. "I'm not trying to be clever, I just want to work. I want to serve my community. I don't want trouble and I don't cause it. I'm sure you can understand that." The officer stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Jamal could hear. "You're walking a thin line, Harris. I've seen people like you. They think they're untouchable until they're not." Jamal continued to act as if he were just another vendor, but his mind was analyzing every word, every motion. He had to stay careful, but he also knew that this could be the moment to gather the evidence he needed. Davis's arrogance, his sense of power, and his overconfidence were all weaknesses that Jamal could use to his advantage. As the tension built, a few regular customers approached the cart, laughing and chatting with Jamal. Their presence offered a subtle buffer, a reminder that the community trusted him. Jamal engaged them, taking orders and making small talk, all while keeping one eye on Davis. The officer did not seem to mind the interruption, but Jamal knew that the confrontation was far from over. After serving the last customer, Jamal stepped aside slightly, giving Davis more space while keeping a watchful eye. "Officer, if there's something you want to discuss, we can do it in a proper way," Jamal said. "I'm always willing to cooperate with the law as long as it's fair and lawful." Davis frowned, clearly frustrated by Jamal's calmness. "You don't understand. Life isn't fair. Rules are for people who don't know how to survive." He paused for a moment as if weighing his next move. "I can make things very difficult for you if you keep ignoring me." Jamal took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been preparing for mentally. He needed to remain composed and confident, showing no fear. "Officer Davis," he said quietly, "I have responsibilities and I respect the law, but I will not be intimidated. I serve this community honestly and I will continue to do so." For a brief moment, Davis seemed taken aback. He had expected compliance, not resistance. His eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of weakness. Jamal stood firm, his posture relaxed but confident. He knew that the officer's reaction was a critical piece of information. It revealed Davis's reliance on fear to control people, and it would be important evidence for the report Jamal was preparing for his federal team. The tension on the street was palpable. Pedestrians walked by, unaware of the silent battle unfolding at the corner. Jamal continued to serve his customers, every gesture deliberate and controlled. He had learned that maintaining normalcy, even in high-pressure situations, was essential for staying safe and gathering information. Davis's presence was intimidating, but Jamal's training allowed him to focus on the objective rather than the fear. Hours passed, and Davis lingered near the cart, occasionally glancing at Jamal and the surrounding area. It was clear he wanted to assert dominance, but Jamal refused to give him the satisfaction. Each interaction was carefully noted in Jamal's mind, every word, every inflection, every motion. He was building a mental record that would later be translated into concrete evidence for the federal investigation. By mid-afternoon, the city streets were busier than ever. Jamal continued to work diligently, serving a stream of customers while keeping Davis at bay. He knew that patience was key. The officer's arrogance would eventually lead him to make a mistake. Jamal's role was to wait, observe, and act when the moment was right. Every day of resistance, every calm response, was slowly shifting the balance of power. As the sun moved higher, Jamal took a brief moment to step back and assess the situation. He noted how Davis interacted with others, the subtle threats in his tone, and the way he used fear to manipulate those around him. Jamal's undercover work had trained him to notice these details, to recognize patterns, and to anticipate actions. He knew that this was more than just a street-level confrontation. This was a microcosm of a larger problem, abuse of power by those meant to serve and protect. Despite the pressure, Jamal remained focused on the community. He greeted new customers with warmth, served food quickly and efficiently, and maintained the appearance of a regular vendor. Yet beneath the surface, he was conducting an investigation, gathering the evidence that could eventually expose corruption and bring justice. His dual life required constant vigilance, careful planning, and unshakable composure. As the day progressed, Davis finally left, muttering under his breath about people who thought they could outsmart him. Jamal allowed himself a small sigh of relief, knowing that the encounter had gone as planned. He had remained calm, collected information, and avoided confrontation. He had played his role perfectly, balancing the need to protect himself with the need to gather evidence. Later that evening, Jamal reflected on the day's events. He understood that Officer Davis's threats were not personal. They were a reflection of the power dynamics at play. Many officers used fear to control others, and only those with courage, intelligence, and careful planning could resist without consequence. Jamal felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had stood his ground, maintained his dignity, and furthered his mission. In the days that followed, Jamal continued his work, both as a vendor and as an undercover marshal. Each interaction with Officer Davis, each observation of his behavior, was another piece of the puzzle. Jamal knew that the bigger confrontation was still ahead, but he also knew that patience, careful observation, and strategic action would eventually lead to a breakthrough. Jamal's life was a constant balance between two worlds, the visible world of his food cart and the hidden world of federal investigation. Both required skill, discipline, and courage. Each day presented new challenges, but Jamal faced them with determination and a clear sense of purpose. He understood that true courage was not just about confronting danger directly, but about navigating it wisely, maintaining integrity, and staying focused on the long-term goal. By the end of the week, Jamal had gathered enough information to feel confident that he was making progress. Officer Davis's patterns were clear, his methods predictable, and his weaknesses evident. Jamal knew that the next phase of his mission would require careful planning and precise execution. He felt ready. Jamal cleaned his cart for the night, reflecting on the week's events. He felt a sense of pride in his dual role. By day, he served his community with honesty and care. By night, he contributed to a larger mission of justice and accountability. Both roles required resilience, intelligence, and heart, and Jamal knew he possessed all three. As he walked home, the city lights twinkling around him, Jamal felt a quiet determination. The path ahead would not be easy, but he was prepared. Officer Davis had underestimated him, and the coming days would reveal just how much courage, patience, and strategy could accomplish. Jamal was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that his work would make a difference, not just for himself, but for the entire community. The days passed with a sense of quiet anticipation. Jamal Harris continued to run his food cart, serving customers with his usual warmth and efficiency, yet beneath the surface, he was constantly alert. Every glance, every conversation, every movement around him was carefully observed. Officer Davis had been watching, too, his frustration simmering beneath the surface like a storm waiting to break. Jamal could feel the tension in the air each time Davis appeared. The officer seemed more determined than ever, convinced that Jamal would eventually give in. But Jamal had no intention of surrendering. Jamal's life as a street vendor had always been challenging, but the stakes had grown higher now. He was no longer just protecting his livelihood. He was also gathering the evidence that could expose corruption within the police department. He knew that Officer Davis's behavior was not an isolated incident. Many officers abused their power in subtle and sometimes overt ways, taking advantage of vulnerable members of the community. Jamal's undercover work aimed to reveal these abuses, but he had to be patient. One wrong move, one careless word, and the entire investigation could collapse. That morning, the city streets buzzed with energy. People hurried to work, students walked to school, and the familiar sounds of the urban landscape filled the air. Jamal had prepared his food cart carefully, arranging sandwiches, drinks, and snacks neatly, ensuring everything was ready for the busy day. As he served his first customers, he noticed Davis approaching from across the street, his eyes scanning the scene with sharp intensity. Jamal took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of focus and calm determination. Today would be an important day. Davis arrived at the cart, his posture tense, his movements deliberate. "Harris," he said, his tone low and menacing, "you still think you can ignore me? You still think you can do your business without acknowledging how things work around here?" Jamal smiled politely, keeping his voice steady. "Officer Davis, I respect the law and I respect my community. I'm here to serve people honestly, and I do not engage in anything unlawful. That's all I can do." The officer's eyes narrowed, his frustration evident. "You think rules and honesty will protect you? Life doesn't work that way. You're lucky I haven't made this place very difficult for you yet, but patience has limits." Jamal nodded slowly, pretending to consider the threat while secretly noting every detail. Davis's tone, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot. All these small observations were pieces of the puzzle that Jamal would later use in his report. He had learned to read people carefully, understanding their motivations and weaknesses, and Davis had many. As the tension grew, Jamal continued to serve customers, maintaining a calm and friendly demeanor. The community trusted him, and their presence added an invisible shield around him. Davis's threats could not intimidate the people who saw Jamal every day, smiling, joking, and helping them. This was a subtle form of protection, one that Jamal had cultivated carefully over the years. Then, Davis leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Jamal could hear. "You think you can stand here day after day, pretending to be untouchable? You think your little food cart and friendly smile will save you? One day, you'll realize the price of defiance." Jamal remained composed, his expression calm. "Officer Davis, I'm not pretending. I'm just living my life, working hard, and serving my community. I have responsibilities, and I cannot allow fear to dictate my actions." For a moment, Davis seemed surprised by Jamal's calmness. He had expected resistance to provoke anger or fear, yet Jamal remained steady. His patience, his control, and his quiet strength were unexpected. The officer's arrogance began to show cracks. Jamal knew this was an important moment. Throughout the morning, the tension between them simmered. Customers continued to come and go, and Jamal served each one with care and attention. The simple acts of preparing food, handing sandwiches across the counter, and chatting briefly with customers masked the high-stakes confrontation taking place just beneath the surface. Every word Davis spoke, every movement he made was carefully recorded in Jamal's mind, forming a complete picture of the officer's behavior. By midday, the street had grown crowded. Vendors were busy, pedestrians moved quickly, and Jamal's cart was the center of activity. Davis stood nearby, watching, occasionally muttering under his breath. Jamal noticed that his presence, while intimidating, did not deter the customers. In fact, they seemed more at ease, perhaps sensing Jamal's confidence and calm in the face of threat. This realization gave Jamal a quiet satisfaction. He was not only protecting himself, but also maintaining a safe environment for his community. Then, the moment Jamal had anticipated finally arrived. Davis's frustration reached a breaking point. He stepped closer to the cart, his voice rising slightly. "Harris, I've warned you enough. You're making this personal, and that's a mistake. I can make life very difficult for you very fast. You need to understand who you're dealing with." Jamal nodded slowly, keeping his tone calm and neutral. "Officer, I understand the law and I respect your role, but I cannot participate in anything unlawful. I have responsibilities and I will continue to do my work honestly. That is all I can do." Davis's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, leaning over the cart in an attempt to intimidate Jamal further. At that moment, Jamal made a subtle signal with his hand, a gesture that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but it was a prearranged sign for the federal team monitoring the situation. They were ready. "Enough games, Harris," Davis said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can stand here and defy me? You think this little act of yours will protect you?" Jamal finally revealed his true identity. In a calm but firm voice, he said, "Officer Davis, you need to know something. I'm not just a vendor. I'm a federal marshal. You've been under observation for months, and your actions have been recorded. Attempting to extort money from me is a serious federal offense." Davis froze, his expression turning from anger to shock. The realization hit him immediately. He had assumed Jamal was an ordinary vendor, someone he could intimidate with ease. Instead, he was confronted with the full force of law enforcement, and his arrogance had left him completely unprepared. Within moments, a team of federal officers emerged from nearby streets, surrounding Davis and making it clear that he was under arrest. The situation, once tense and dangerous, was now controlled. Pedestrians stopped in their tracks, staring in disbelief as the officer they had seen frequently on the streets was taken into custody. Jamal's calm, strategic patience had paid off. Davis's attempts at intimidation were rendered useless, his threats exposed as empty against the weight of evidence and law. Jamal observed quietly as Davis was escorted away, maintaining his composure even as relief and satisfaction coursed through him. The community around him, unaware of the full scope of his undercover work, simply saw a man standing calmly, protecting his business and serving his customers. After the arrest, Jamal allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He had faced months of harassment, threats, and intimidation, yet he had remained composed, patient, and strategic. His work had not only protected himself, but had also contributed to a larger mission of justice. He had demonstrated that courage, intelligence, and integrity could overcome corruption and abuse of power. The neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm, with Jamal continuing to serve food and interact with customers. Yet the air felt different, charged with the knowledge that something significant had occurred. Jamal's calm presence, his dedication to honesty, and his commitment to justice had made a difference. Officer Davis's arrest would serve as a warning to others who abused their authority, a reminder that wrongdoing would eventually be exposed. As the day came to a close, Jamal cleaned his cart, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. He felt a quiet pride in his dual role, both as a community member and as a federal marshal. Each day brought challenges, but it also brought opportunities to make a real difference. He understood that his work was far from over, but he had proven that patience, observation, and courage were powerful tools against injustice. Jamal packed up his cart and walked home, the city lights illuminating the streets. He thought about the journey that had led him here, the years of training, the dedication to his community, and the careful planning that allowed him to succeed in his mission. He knew that his efforts had made the streets safer, his community stronger, and the law more accountable. Tonight, Jamal allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had faced danger, deception, and corruption, and he had emerged victorious, not through force, but through intelligence, patience, and integrity. The experience had reinforced his belief that justice, when pursued with courage and wisdom, could prevail even in the face of adversity. As Jamal walked home, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to serve both his community and the greater cause of justice. But for now, he felt a sense of accomplishment. The confrontation with Officer Davis had tested his resolve, his patience, and his skills. And in the end, it had proven that standing up for what is right, even in the face of fear, was always worth it. The arrest of Officer Davis sent ripples through the neighborhood, though most people didn't understand the full story. For them, it was simply unusual to see a familiar officer being led away in handcuffs, surrounded by a group of serious-looking men in plain clothes. Some of the pedestrians whispered to each other, trying to piece together what had happened, while others glanced at Jamal Harris with curiosity. Jamal, as always, remained calm, continuing to serve his customers as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But inside, he was quietly reflecting on the events of the past weeks and months. Running a food cart had always been more than a job for Jamal. It was a way of life, a connection to the community, and a source of pride. Yet his dual role as a federal marshal gave it an added dimension. Every day he spent behind the cart was not only a service to the people who came for food, but also a part of a larger mission to protect the community from abuse of power. He had faced harassment, intimidation, and constant pressure from Officer Davis, but now the culmination of patience, strategy, and courage had resulted in justice. In the immediate aftermath, Jamal noticed subtle changes around him. Vendors who had previously been intimidated by Davis seemed lighter in spirit. They walked with less hesitation and exchanged glances that carried newfound confidence. Some even approached Jamal with quiet smiles, offering words of gratitude. Though he did not reveal his identity as a federal marshal to them, he felt a sense of connection and satisfaction knowing that his actions had created a ripple effect of courage and hope. News of the arrest began to circulate through local media channels, though it was reported in general terms, focusing on corruption within the police department rather than the undercover details. Jamal was content with this. His goal had never been personal recognition. He had wanted justice, fairness, and accountability. Seeing Davis held responsible for his actions without causing unnecessary disruption to the community was enough. Jamal's day-to-day life gradually returned to a familiar rhythm, yet there was a sense of change in the air. People who frequented his cart noticed his calm confidence, a presence that suggested he had been through something significant. Jamal greeted them as always, engaging in light conversation, joking with children, and serving meals with efficiency and warmth. But now there was a subtle weight behind his actions, a sense of accomplishment and quiet vigilance. Even as the routine returned, Jamal remained alert. His work as a federal marshal was far from over. He knew that corruption in positions of power often ran deep, and one arrest, while significant, was just one step in a larger process. There were still investigations to be conducted, patterns to observe, and systems to challenge. Yet Jamal approached these responsibilities with patience, discipline, and a steady focus, understanding that meaningful change often took time and careful planning. One afternoon, a group of regular customers approached the cart, smiling as they placed their orders. "Jamal," one of them said, "things feel different around here. People seem to be walking taller, more confident. Whatever happened, it's like the neighborhood is lighter." Jamal smiled warmly, serving their food. "I think people have always been strong," he said. "Sometimes it just takes a little courage to remind ourselves of that." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience. Jamal had seen fear and intimidation, and he knew the power of resilience. Even small acts of courage could inspire others to stand firm and reclaim their sense of dignity. The arrest of Officer Davis had also sparked conversations among the community about accountability, fairness, and the importance of standing up against wrongdoing. Vendors who had previously paid protection fees or complied with unfair demands began to discuss ways to support each other, forming informal networks of mutual assistance. Jamal, while careful not to reveal his undercover role, observed these developments with quiet satisfaction. The seeds of change were being planted, and he was witnessing them grow. Jamal's dual life required constant attention. By day, he was a vendor, a familiar and trusted figure in the neighborhood. By night, he analyzed data, documented patterns, and collaborated with his federal colleagues to build comprehensive reports. The discipline and focus required for this work were demanding, but Jamal found purpose in it. He understood that justice was not achieved through one dramatic act alone, but through consistent effort, careful observation, and a commitment to doing what was right. Over the following weeks, Jamal reflected on the personal lessons he had learned. He had confronted fear and intimidation with calmness and strategy. He had seen firsthand how arrogance and abuse of power could unravel when met with patience and intelligence. And he had experienced the satisfaction of contributing to meaningful change, both in his community and within the broader systems of accountability. These lessons would guide him in future encounters, shaping the way he approached challenges both as a vendor and as a federal marshal. Community members began to notice a subtle shift in the energy around the food cart. People who had once been quiet or hesitant now approached with more confidence, eager to engage with Jamal, share their stories, and support one another. Children who played near the corner learned to recognize his friendly smile, and adults began to trust that his presence brought stability and fairness. Jamal recognized that trust was a powerful tool, one that could transform a neighborhood, and he continued to nurture it through his actions, words, and dedication. As the city continued its daily rhythm, Jamal found moments to pause and reflect. He thought about the courage it took to stand firm, the patience required to wait for the right opportunity, and the intelligence needed to navigate complex situations. He realized that these qualities were not innate. They were cultivated through experience, perseverance, and a commitment to principles. His own journey had been shaped by these forces, and he hoped that others could learn from them, even without knowing the full story behind the events that had unfolded. One evening, as Jamal packed up his cart, he noticed a small group of young vendors watching him from a distance. They approached cautiously, as if unsure how to speak to him. One of them asked, "Jamal, how do you stay so calm? How do you handle people like Officer Davis?" Jamal smiled, kneeling slightly to meet their gaze. "It's not about fighting with anger," he explained. "It's about staying calm, observing carefully, and knowing when to act. You have to protect yourself, but you also have to think ahead. Courage is quiet, not loud. It shows in what you do, not just what you say." The young vendors listened intently, absorbing his words. Jamal knew that mentorship and guidance were important parts of building stronger communities. By sharing his insights, he could empower others to face challenges with confidence, integrity, and wisdom. Even small lessons passed quietly could ripple outward and create lasting change. As weeks turned into months, Jamal's food cart became more than just a place to get a meal. It became a symbol of resilience, honesty, and courage. People respected him not only for his food, but also for his character and the way he carried himself. The neighborhood, once tense and cautious, began to feel safer, more united, and more confident. The arrest of Officer Davis had served as a catalyst, but the real transformation came from ongoing actions, trust, and integrity, qualities Jamal embodied every day. At home, Jamal reflected on his journey with a sense of fulfillment. His dual life had been demanding, challenging, and sometimes exhausting, but it had been worth every moment. He had stood up against corruption, protected his community, and demonstrated that courage and integrity could overcome intimidation and abuse of power. He had witnessed the power of patience, careful observation, and strategic action. And he had seen the ripple effects of his actions in the people around him. Looking toward the future, Jamal knew that his work was not finished. Corruption and abuse existed in many forms, and new challenges would arise. But he felt prepared to face them, guided by the lessons he had learned, the discipline he had cultivated, and the sense of purpose that had carried him through difficult times. He understood that true change was gradual, requiring persistence, careful planning, and unwavering commitment. Jamal's story, though deeply personal, also reflected universal truths. Standing up for what is right often requires courage, patience, and resilience. Facing intimidation with calm confidence can transform not only individual lives, but entire communities. Integrity, honesty, and dedication are powerful forces that can inspire others and create lasting impact. And even in the face of fear and uncertainty, it is possible to make a meaningful difference through thoughtful action and strategic courage. As the city continued its rhythm, Jamal's food cart remained a steady presence at the corner, a beacon of reliability and integrity. People continued to come for food, conversation, and connection. Jamal continued to serve, observing, documenting, and contributing quietly to a larger mission of justice and accountability. His work, both visible and hidden, was making a difference, and the neighborhood felt safer and stronger because of it. On quiet evenings, after the cart was closed and the street was empty, Jamal allowed himself moments of reflection. He thought about the challenges he had faced, the threats he had endured, and the courage it had taken to remain calm and strategic. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that his actions had contributed to fairness, justice, and community strength. Jamal Harris had begun as a simple street vendor with dreams of independence and dignity. Along the way, he had faced intimidation, corruption, and danger. Yet through patience, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to what was right, he had emerged not only victorious, but also as a role model of resilience and integrity. The journey had been long, the challenges significant, but the impact of his actions would continue to resonate in the community for years to come. The story of Jamal Harris, the street vendor who was also an undercover federal marshal, became a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a reminder that courage, patience, and integrity could triumph over corruption and fear. And as Jamal walked home one evening, the city lights reflecting off the streets, he felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, confident that the right actions taken with patience and wisdom could always make a difference.